There was once an attempt to colonize the world's end. It was like the space race, but 500 years ago. Plant the flag in another world, one almost impossible to reach. The Spanish and English empires had been racing to rule the earth as far as it stretched. The Spaniards had had the lead for quite some time, but the feats of Sir Francis Drake were terrorizing their colonies, exposing the Holy Roman Empire's vulnerabilities. The greater part of the Americas belonged to the Spaniards, but it was a difficult thing to upkeep, for it stretched to the very end of the world, where cartographers' quills halted. Whoever could control those unknown parts would certainly hold the ultimate power. King Philip II had to secure the world's end fast, whatever the risk. Thus, he ordered that the Strait of Magellan be fortified and colonized to block further English intrusions into the Pacific. What awaited them there were native giants, calamity, treason, abandonment, and famine. For the mission, King Philip II employed the controversial figure of Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa, a seasoned navigator, a mathematician, an astronomer, a historian, and a victim of the Inquisition, accused of possessing magic rings and a certain mystical ink that made any woman fall in love with whoever wrote with it. Gamboa was a man walking the corners of wisdom, simultaneously translating Plato while drawing a few horoscopes on the side. This curious temperament led him into some trouble with the church, but it made him the perfect candidate for the discovery of the world's end. A man who stood at the edge of our understanding of the world, seeking for divine order in the universe. His career in the New World had started in Peru. He had been the alferez general in the expedition that captured Tupac Amaru. He had chased, though unsuccessfully, Sir Francis Drake, or as they called him, Draco, around Panama. He had already stood at the very edge of the world itself, having explored and mapped out the Straits of Magellan, and now he was given the mission of securing it for good, building forts and founding permanent towns to leave a self-sufficient Christian colony that would flourish well into the future for the glory of God and His Majesty. The fleet began assembling on the 27th of September of 1581 in Sanlúcar de Barrameda, 23 ships and nearly 3,000 souls, soldiers, settlers, women, priests, and livestock. The Armada would make its way to the Bay of Cádiz, where they would depart under Don Diego Flores de Valdés, General of the Armada for the Strait of Magellan and Captain of His Majesty's ships, with Sarmiento as cosmographer general. The two men fell at immediate odds. The ordeal of assembling at Cádiz to launch an expedition was not without much toil and the premature loss of several ships, including one at the entrance of the Bay of Cádiz, which was swallowed up and foundered. The fleet, having arrived at Cádiz, Diego Flores was described as being in such a state of dismay and perturbation that he was unable to give an order nor to apply any remedy to any defect found. All he could do was send excuses so as to not have to go on the voyage, and to ask permission to remain behind. In the end, the king would encourage Flores, and Flores agreed to carry on. But he did so in such a lukewarm way that everyone was of the opinion that he never wanted to embark on the journey to begin with. Sarmiento in the meantime was busy rescuing some ships that had gone to shore. A pilot had fled and had stolen many provisions, and Sarmiento was rescuing what he could of it. When Diego Flores heard that Sarmiento was preoccupied with these things, he departed without waiting for him, leaving Sarmiento on shore and going to sea without him. In order to catch up to him, Sarmiento hired a brigantine which cost him more money and went in chase some considerable distance outside. Diego Flores laughed when he saw the shipmen being paid, for he always rejoiced at the troubles and expenses of Pedro Sarmiento. In these spirits, the fleet left Cádiz and began its journey on the 9th of December of 1581. They arrived at Santiago de Cabo Verde, where they stayed for a month, whereupon a terrible disease broke out. Sarmiento tells us of the pestilence sailors succumbed to around these parts. Some suffered from fevers, which is a pestilence that carries people off very rapidly in this land of Guinea. Others suffered from eruptions and tumors, others from contractions of the nerves in legs, arms, and in the teeth. Especially a disease broke out which was contagious and emitting an insufferably bad odor. It swells the gums, forms abscesses, and many die of it, while he who does not die suffers terribly. 150 people died during this episode. In this state, they crossed the mighty Atlantic. When they finally arrived at Rio de Janeiro on the 24th of March of 1582, where by the king's orders they would winter, the misery continued. Heat, drought, quarrels, ships eaten by worms, men eaten by fevers, settlers who feared what would come, and a general who wished to go home. When the time came, Sarmiento, undeterred, wanted to carry on to the world's end, but Flores claimed sickness and damage, accusing Sarmiento of being rash and overzealous. He said the ships were not ready, the men were not fit, the season was not right. More than a year passed in this fashion. Sarmiento repaired hulls, counted barrels, harassed carpenters, and urged departure. Flores, whenever he could, organized councils of war to prove that the voyage was impossible. The officers were clear that one man wanted to go to the strait and the other wanted to go home. But at last they would sail again from Brazil towards the south. However, they did not go as a single fleet. Flores, with the majority of the ships, trailed behind, reluctantly, while Sarmiento sailed ahead. Along the way, in Santa Catalina and São Vicente, men deserted, deciding that anything was better than the Strait of Magellan. When they reached the River Plate and a leak was discovered on their captain's ship, Flores said that under no conditions should the Capitana proceed in its present state. Some supported him, others looked to Sarmiento for his thoughts, whereupon he delivered the following speech.
Gentlemen, I never use words without feeling obliged to follow them by corresponding acts. The king, our lord, trusted in me, and I distinctly promised my services. For this I cannot swerve. As regards the present enterprise, neither my reputation and condition, nor that of any man of honor, would permit me to turn my face backwards, so long as I am not forced to do so by violence, and even then it must be clearly shown that nothing more is possible. Therefore, so long as I have life and health and a vessel under my feet, with the help of God I will not turn away from achieving this enterprise, in compliance with the will of His Majesty, until it is completed, or until my life's end with my best ability. If I have to go alone, as I did when I came from Peru to discover the strait, I should complete the voyage or end my life without waiting until the winter was past. I therefore say and require that we must go on and do that which His Majesty has ordered us to do. If the enemy should occupy the strait before us, it will be a great injury to the service of our Lord God and to His Majesty, as well as ignominious to us and to our nation. Yet we know that the enemy is in these seas, for the Father Fray Juan de Rivadeneira has told us that he has seen their ships, and that they are proceeding to occupy the strait, or to pass it and commit robberies on the coasts of the South Sea, Malucco, and India, as Drake did. As for the leak on board the galeas, it is being repaired, as well as the foremast, and by this time the repairs are completed. As the Lord General does not wish to go in the Capitana, he need not fear what I do, for his person is safe.
After this speech, there was no arguing against proceeding. Sarmiento, at the lead, with 6 ships, reached the eastern mouth of the strait by late February of 1583. They attempted to enter the strait, but the ebb swept them back. They tried again, and the tides spat them back out into the Atlantic. 3 times they went in and out like that, the currents dragging them backwards as if the strait itself rejected them. Sarmiento called out to Flores and demanded that they anchor under Cape Virgins to hold position until the tides turned, but Flores refused. I am going to Brazil. He who pleases can follow me. I shall not remain here, Flores said. Pedro Sarmiento cried out in a loud voice so that everyone could hear.
Señor Diego Flores, your worship is well aware of the fault that is committed by you, being able to return to the strait as you are able, for there can be no excuse where there is no obstacle, and there is no pardon when we do not do our best. Dense ignorance is worth nothing, and he cannot merit the palm who shuns the fight. Remember that in Spain, little is made of this navigation, and our discoveries are not considered. Your worship has not even seen a flower in the sea nor passed into the South Sea, whither it may seem impossible to go. God helps the weak and resolute when we make discoveries and pass on with His grace, to whom be many thanks. Some arrive here in one small vessel to the honor and glory of our Lord God, not being more mortal than your worship, for the more of a knight, the greater the obligation to show constancy in an arduous service.
Flores left, abandoning the king's orders and abandoning Sarmiento. All the other ships, except Sarmiento's flagship and a single small craft, followed their general and turned their backs on the world's end. Sarmiento, for a brief time, held on. He did try to enter the strait with those few ships, pushed by his own resoluteness. But the weather, the currents, the lack of provisions, and the state of his hulls conspired against him. He could not force the passage alone. Not then, not with the season already advanced, and his men half broken by 2 years of sickness and storms. In the end, he too had to give way and fall back on the Brazilian coast. They returned to the same muddy stage, São Vicente, Santa Catarina, Rio de Janeiro. In Pernambuco, Sarmiento wrote his report to the king, laying out the disasters of the voyage and accusing Diego Flores de Valdés of having abandoned the strait and disobeyed His Majesty's express will. It was also from this Brazilian orbit that he watched Flores peel away from the mission entirely and eventually make his way back to Spain with excuses. By then, Sarmiento de Gamboa was essentially alone with his obsession. The end of the world still lay unsecured, his ambition unfulfilled. The great armada of 1581 no longer existed. What he had now were the scraps. A few ships that could still float, some soldiers, some settlers, and a royal commission naming him governor of the strait and its settlements. He decided that with or without Flores, with or without a proper fleet, he would fulfill his mission. In the end, the king himself sided with Sarmiento and ordered Flores back home in disgrace and urged Sarmiento to carry on. On December 2nd of 1583, Sarmiento left Rio de Janeiro again, this time effectively on his own responsibility, with a much smaller squadron, but the same impossible task. On February 1st of 1584, he passed once more before Cape Virgins and entered the Strait of Magellan. This time the currents let him in. He would now complete His Majesty's mission. They entered the strait for half a league, where Diego de la Ribera put the people on shore, as he himself did not want to enter the strait any farther. 280 men landed at this place, under Captain Pedro Sarmiento. Here he founded his first settlement, calling it Nombre de Jesus. While Diego de la Ribera departed, leaving no supplies except what was contained in that one small vessel. Pedro Sarmiento dispatched the small vessel up the strait with some arms and a crew of sailors, with orders to wait at a point called Santa Ana until he and the settlers reached that place by land. During their time in this first settlement, 250 natives with signs of peace appeared. There were men and women of gigantic size. The giants had been exposed to the Spaniards before, and with signs and with what little words they could get across, peace was maintained. However, 3 nights later, the giants came back, attacking their settlement. Many soldiers were wounded. Sarmiento gave orders to his captain, Iñiguez, to march inland and find them. Iñiguez came upon 220 natives. They came to Iñiguez, but nothing was understood. The captain of these natives took Iñiguez by the hand and led him to the other natives, as if in friendship. The Spaniards thought that this was so, until Captain Iñiguez cried out that the natives were carrying him off. The soldiers then attacked them, killed several natives with their harquebuses, and recovered their captain. When they fired, the natives who were hit shook the place as if what had struck them would drop out. The women cried out and made signs that the Spaniards should depart, which they did, and returned to the camp. Leaving 300 settlers in Nombre de Jesus, Pedro Sarmiento set out by land with 80 soldiers to go looking for the small vessel he had ordered ahead. Having gone about 10 leagues, they came upon the wreck of a ship, finding more pieces of it along the way. It did not seem like it was a ship he had sent, but it nevertheless was a grim warning. Marching along the coast to the first narrow, 11 gigantic natives like the others met them. Pedro Sarmiento stopped and joined them, treating them in a friendly way, and asking them if they had seen a vessel pass that way a few days before. They replied by signs in the affirmative, and that it was 8 days since they had seen her. After they had been half an hour with the Indians, a Franciscan friar, whom Pedro Sarmiento had brought with him, gave them to understand that Sarmiento was captain of the Spaniards who had come. The native, hearing this statement, answered that he himself was captain, striking his breast, and he showed anger that the friar should have said that Sarmiento was captain. Going a little apart, he took an arrow out of his mouth, cut himself with it, spit some blood out, and coolly anointed his bosom with it. the friar told Pedro Sarmiento that they must depart from thence because these natives were sorcerers and were deceived by the devil, and that it was better to go away. So they went on, searching for the ship, and after a time they perceived that the natives who had remained behind were now following them. The Spaniards went on without taking notice, and the natives, seeing that 12 or 14 Spaniards were marching behind as a rear guard, shot arrows at them. The soldiers defended themselves with the arms they carried, although they could not use their harquebuses because the matches were packed up. The natives killed an officer named Loperraes and wounded 8 soldiers with their arrows, who died afterwards. It was looked upon as certain that the arrows must have been anointed with poisonous herbs, for not one of the wounded ever recovered. The Spaniards killed the native chief, and the rest were badly wounded, taking to flight as Pedro Sarmiento returned to rescue with his vanguard. Having attended to the wounded and interred the officer, they passed the night there without being disturbed, and proceeded on their way the next morning, and for several following days. At the end of 15 days since leaving the first settlement, they found their little vessel anchored in a small port with sufficient depth of water, but no inhabitants. On that day, which was St. Mark's Day, when they found the ship at anchor in that port, it began to snow, and a site was sought out which seemed suitable near the sea. The perfect place to found their city at the end of the world. Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa founded the city of King Philip, fortifying it and surrounding it with very strong timbers, but leaving an opening towards the sea, where 2 pieces of artillery were mounted. 2 other gates were left towards the hills, each with 2 pieces of artillery. The settlement having been formed, posts were established in convenient positions. After 20 or 30 days, the people were getting worn out with hard work and hunger, and from want of proper clothing, and were becoming disgusted. One night, when Tomé Hernandez, our witness, was visiting the posts as officer of the guard, he found a clergyman named Alonso Sanchez, at a late hour of the night, conversing with a soldier named Juan de Arroyo, who was on sentry. They murmured to one another for a moment, and the clergyman departed. Seeing that the clergyman had gone away very angry, Tomé Hernandez sought him out, and asked him what was happening. The clergyman answered that if he could keep a secret, he would give him notice of a serious business, very profitable to all soldiers. Tomé gave his promise, and the clergyman told him it was discussed among all soldiers to mutiny and kill Pedro Sarmiento, seize the ship, and return in it to Brazil, because their lives had become insufferable. Tomé Hernandez reported the affair to Pedro Sarmiento as soon as he landed from the ship, for the captain slept on board every night, and had he not taken this precaution and had slept on shore, he would have been killed some days before. Having this knowledge, Sarmiento sent for a soldier named Juan Rodriguez, a native of La Mancha, who was the ringleader of the mutiny, and having him on board, he sent for 3 other soldiers, his comrades, and put them under arrest. Then he sent for the clergyman, and took their confessions. They declared that it was true about the mutiny, so he took them on shore with scrolls on their backs, declaring their treason, and caused them to be beheaded in the plaza from behind, and their heads to be stuck on poles. The clergyman remained a prisoner on board. Having been 2 months in this second settlement, Pedro Sarmiento embarked on board the ship with the sailors and 10 or 12 soldiers, and made sail. He left the settlement quiet and peaceful in charge of his nephew, Juan Suarez, who remained as captain. He said that he was going for the rest of the settlers at the first settlement, to bring them to the other, and afterwards to proceed to Chile for provisions. He would never return again. 2 months after Pedro Sarmiento sailed from the second settlement, the people who had remained in the first settlement arrived, and all were collected at the second settlement. This was in August, which was winter, and they came by land. Their news was that Pedro Sarmiento had arrived with the ship at the anchorage of the first settlement, which is an open bay without any shelter. Then there was a great storm, and the ship being at anchor, they slipped the cables and made sail. The settlers were alone. What followed was a 2.5-year nightmare of chilling misery and starvation. The settlers died quickly, each settlement going for the other, thinking that the other held salvation. The fortunate died along the way, the bodies frozen along the coast. The others would arrive to the other settlement to find their numbers dwindled and equally famished. The two captains of each settlement ordered the people to scatter and survive on whatever shellfish they could find on the shore. All survivors eventually would gather at the city of King Philip, the second settlement, for it was better sheltered, but death would not be kept at bay. When summer finally came, one captain ordered some men to return to the mouth of the strait. When they arrived, it appeared that salvation had come for them. The captain's intuition on point. They spotted several ships off the coast who could rescue them. Tomé Hernandez would be the one who would meet with them, but it turned out they were not Spanish, but English, and they were not so inclined to take on board more mouths to feed. Their captain was none other than Thomas Cavendish, and he did what was most pragmatic. He took only Tomé Hernandez to use as a guide and instrument along his way, but not without first visiting the city of King Philip and renaming it with a more suiting title. He called it Port Famine. The surviving 3 women and 12 men were left and abandoned there. Tomé Hernandez would carry on with the English until he was able to improvise an escape in the port of Quintero on the coast of Chile. Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa, back when he was on his way to get provisions for the settlers, had been ordered to return to Spain, and on his way to bring account of what happened to the king, he was captured by English pirates, and then was taken to England as a prized prisoner, interrogated by Queen Elizabeth herself. After being liberated, he was captured by the French, and when ultimately he was free again, he wrote a letter to the king, begging for the loyal people of the strait to be rescued, dated November 21st of 1591. By then, everyone was dead.